Good morning to all those who are joining us here in the Brookings Institution's Falk Auditorium, and greetings to all those who are joining us virtually from across Washington, across the country, and around the world. I'm Suzanne Maloney. I'm Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy here at Brookings, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our discussion today with Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs, Daniel Kritenbrink, and Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, Eli Ratner. Our conversation today will examine the American approach to the Indo-Pacific region and how the United States interacts with key allies and partners, particularly Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, to advance a shared regional vision for peace, stability, and prosperity in a free and open Indo-Pacific. From the Quad Leaders Summit to hosting APEC in San Francisco later this year, to the upcoming visit of the Secretary of Defense to the region, Washington has placed a renewed focus on the economic, military, and strategic value of the Indo-Pacific and the networks in the region. Building on the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Pact, the Biden administration announced the creation of AUKUS in September 2021, a new partnership between the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, which combines technology sharing and cooperation to increase military capabilities and solidifies Australia as an important ally for the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. At a time of heightened tensions between the United States and China, how is the Biden administration working with allies and partners in the region to address various challenges and to ensure that competition is managed responsibly without veering into conflict? These are incredibly timely and important questions, and I'm truly honored to have Assistant Secretaries Dan Kritenbrink and Eli Ratner here at Brookings to dive into these issues. Let me introduce our speakers very briefly before I turn the mic over to our moderators. Assistant Secretary Dan Kritenbrink has served as an American diplomat since 1994. He's held the position of Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs since September 2021, and previously represented the United States as Ambassador to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, as Senior Director for Asian Affairs at the National Security Council, and as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Dr. Eli Ratner currently serves as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs. Prior to this role, he was Director of the Pentagon's China Task Force and Senior Advisor on China to the Secretary of Defense. He has also held roles outside of government, including as Executive Vice President and Director of Studies at the Center for a New American Security. We've been privileged to engage with both Assistant Secretary Ratner and Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink here at Brookings on multiple issues related to Asia Pacific over many years. Joining our speakers here for this moderated discussion are two wonderful Brookings colleagues, Mireya Solis and Bruce Jones. Mireya Solis is the Director of the Center for East Asia Policy Studies. She's also the Philip Knight Chair in Japan Studies and a Senior Fellow in the Foreign Policy Program here at Brookings. She has a much-anticipated book coming out in about 6 weeks' time, entitled Japan's Quiet Leadership, Reshaping the Indo-Pacific. Her book examines how Japan has emerged as a profoundly consequential actor in the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, and I encourage all of you to pick it up when it is published in just a few weeks' time. Bruce Jones is a Senior Fellow in the Strobe Talbot Center for Security Strategy and Technology, as well as our Center for East Asia Policy Studies. His book, published in 2021, To Rule the Waves, How Control of the World's Oceans Shapes the Fate of the Superpowers, analyzes U.S.-China naval competition in the wider context of commercial and scientific dominance of the high seas. Before I turn the podium over to our moderators, I wanted to offer a final reminder that we're on the record today and we're streaming live. So please send your questions via email to events@brookings.edu or on social media using the hashtag Indo-Pacific. For those of you in the auditorium here, Brookings staff will come around with microphones for a question and answer session toward the final moments of our event. Thank you. The floor is now yours, Mireya and Bruce. Over to Mireya for the very first question.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone. Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink and Assistant Secretary Ratner, it's wonderful to have you with us here at Brookings. So I think that the best way to start the conversation this morning is with a big picture. So if I can ask Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink to offer some thoughts as to what do you see as the most consequential trends and developments? Where should our eyes be when we look at where the region is heading?
Thank you, Mireya, and thank you everyone for coming. It's such an honor to be here at Brookings today, and I'm really grateful to the wonderful scholarship and thought leadership that Brookings provides on a daily basis. And I'm always excited to have an opportunity to talk about our commitment to and our engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. We believe that much of the history of the 21st century will be written in the Indo-Pacific. America's future security and prosperity is inextricably linked to developments in this consequential region. And the United States of America is absolutely committed to investing in the collective capacity of our allies, partners, and friends in this region to bolster the rules-based international order and to work together to counter all challenges as they may arise. I'm particularly excited to have an opportunity, Mireya, to highlight the trip that Secretary Blinken will take next week to the Indo-Pacific region. It will be his 12th trip to the region. It'll be his 3rd trip to a Pacific Island country. He'll travel to Tonga, New Zealand, and Australia. In Tonga, we'll have an opportunity. He'll be the first Secretary of State to ever visit Tonga. He'll have an opportunity to formally dedicate our new embassy in Nuku'alofa, which opened in May of this year, again demonstrating our stepped-up engagement across the Pacific Islands. We'll be able to celebrate our partnership with Tonga, celebrate the return of the Peace Corps, and to talk about the great work that we'll do together to counter collective challenges, including climate change. We'll then go to New Zealand, and we'll celebrate the partnership that we have with New Zealand, in which we're working on challenges both regionally and globally. And of course, the Secretary will have an opportunity to view a World Cup soccer game as well, which we're excited about as well. Maybe that's the highlight of the trip right there. Then we'll travel to Brisbane for a series of bilateral meetings with our Australian allies. And then the most consequential, I think, interaction of the trip will be the Aussman, the 2+2 with the Secretaries of State and Defense engaging with their Australian counterparts. But again, Mireya, this is just the latest trip that I think demonstrates our strong and enduring commitment to the Indo-Pacific. We are an Indo-Pacific nation. We are a partner, a friend, and neighbor to these countries. And again, the central animating feature of our policy is our commitment to our allies, partners, and friends, building their collective capacity so we can work together on shared challenges. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to open.
Thank you very much.
Let me pull you out a little bit on that, Dan, and Eli, bring you in as well. Secretary Austin is heading to Papua New Guinea and then to Australia for the Aussman. And I'm struck watching the dynamics in the region. That it seems to me that we're doing two things simultaneously, and I wonder if there's some tension between them, or I want to kind of explore that with you. On the one hand, if you think about the relationship with Australia, Japan, Taiwan, there's very high-end political defense engagement along a sort of a geopolitical front, if I can put it that way. On the other hand, if I think about Papua New Guinea, Tonga, Kiribati, Solomons, it's very different. We're looking at global issues, climate change, illegal fishing. Those countries are very keen not to be caught in the kind of geopolitical maw of U.S.-China competition. How do you balance those two things? How does the Secretary Austin think about that when he's traveling? And how does that play into how you sort of approach the question, approach the region as a whole? And I'd be interested in whether there's a difference between how the Australians and how we think about that balance between the geopolitical and the kind of global, if I can put it that way. Eli.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bruce, and let me echo my thanks just for the opportunity to be here. Great to be here with Dan. We were up on the stage yesterday. We were up on the hill together, and Dan had to answer all of the hard questions, so we decided before coming in that we were going to preserve that format for today, so thanks to Ambassador Kritenbrink in advance for taking all the hard ones. Look, I think my answer will be that I think what you see as potential tension and contradiction is not how I would view what we're trying to do in the region. And I think one of actually the most significant elements that we see is what Secretary Austin has talked about repeatedly and most recently at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June is a shared vision among our allies and partners. This is not America's vision for the Indo-Pacific. It is a shared vision that is articulated by the Japanese, by the Pacific Islands, by the Australians, by the Koreans, right down the line of a region that is free and open, that is free of coercion, in which disputes are managed peacefully. It is true that with different allies and partners, we have different mixes in terms of the types of engagements we have and the tools we bring to bear, but I think there is very close alignment, and we meet our partners where they are. And the Pacific Islands, for whom you are correct, are very focused on issues like climate change, illegal fishing, that will be a major part of our partnership. Others who are more focused on high-end deterrence, we're gonna meet them where they are. And so, again, while the tools may be different, I think there is clear strategic alignment, and that is why we have been so successful over the last year. On this trip in particular, and I think the description of it will bear that out a little bit, we talk a lot about these trips being historic, and this trip will be historic, both in its form, insofar as Secretary Austin is the first Secretary of Defense going to PNG ever, but as well as the content, both in PNG and Australia. And it comes on the heels, as Dan said, of a series of meetings we have done together, our secretaries have done together, starting in January with Japan, with the Philippines, another 2+2, and now this one, in which each one, there is no kidding historic steps forward in our collective efforts to advance that shared vision. So Secretary will be traveling to PNG. We'll be hopping on the plane on Tuesday for a short, roughly 18-hour flight. Secretary's plane has aerial refueling, so we just go straight wherever we have to go. So long trips out to the region. So we'll be heading to PNG. Our countries have just signed a new defense cooperation agreement, which is opening a new era in our defense relations with Papua New Guinea. It's going to allow us to expand our bilateral exercises. It's going to allow us to do more training and deepen the capability of the Papua New Guinea Defense Forces. And it's going to allow us to support PNG through enhanced infrastructure that's going to allow us to operate from there and support them. And one of the agreements that we are going to be advancing as part of this trip is a new shipwrighter agreement, whereby our Coast Guard supports PNG forces and we work together to deal with some of those local issues, maritime security issues, illegal fishing and whatnot. So huge, important moment in the U.S. relationship with PNG. Then onward, Dan said, is to the down to Australia to watch soccer, and we'll have a meeting on the margins of that.
Oh, are you going to see a match there?
Yeah, we'll all be there together. Very exciting. I think we're going to get to see the Australian women play, which will be absolutely terrific. They had a great victory in their first match, so looking forward to see how they do on their next one. But there again, really important achievements that we'll be talking about. You couldn't ask for a better set of interlocutors than Minister Wong and Minister Marles committed to this relationship. And from the defense perspective, what we're going to be talking about is very much in line with what we've been doing throughout the region with the Philippines, with the Japanese, and I'll just cite 3 things very quickly. We can get into the details. But number one, working with our allies and partners on their capabilities. The Australians are very focused in building out a domestic indigenous munitions capability, and we're going to support that, and we're going to have some specific announcements associated with that. Number 2, we have been working vigilantly to build out a more diversified, mobile, resilient, lethal force posture throughout the region. We've got a lot going on with the Australians, and we'll be rolling out some very specific new announcements associated with that. And then finally, and I think one of the most important innovations in the region is that we are networking our alliances and partnerships together like never before. And we made an announcement last year that we were going to start looking at ways to integrate Japan in particular into U.S. force posture initiatives in Northern Australia, and we're going to have some specific announcements next week about how we're going to do that. So putting really big, important strategic points on the board, and in doing so, really advancing that shared vision I talked about.
Hey, can I say, Eli, brilliant laydown. My only quibble is you had to, rub our noses in it that you'll aerial refuel on the way. I think we have to refuel at least 2, if not 3 times on the way to Tonga, but that's okay.
Can't you offer them a lift?
Can I just foot stomp one of Eli's key points that just really resonated with me? Again, this is not all about China. This is about our partnerships with the countries of the Indo-Pacific. We have a regional strategy of which China is a part and not the other way around. Our allies and partners are intrinsically valuable to us. That's going to be the focus of our efforts across the region. The China challenge looms large for all of our partners, just as it does for us. But I think the best way to manage that challenge is to focus again on building the collective capacity of our partners, talking about how we can work together, demonstrating the strength of our commitment to our partners. And if we do that, I'm confident we'll manage the other challenges.
Thank you very much. So let me then, I think this is a very good moment to move to another important topic that builds on the dimension of partnership, but also the interplay between geopolitics and climate change. Because clearly the green transition is very important for the Biden administration, it's very important for the Australian government, it's very important for scores of our partners. But in order to accomplish that green transition, we're going to have we need access to a vast amount of resources, critical rare minerals, and China is an important player here. China has a dominant position in some of these minerals, and China recently announced that there will be new restrictions on, let me get the names right, gallium and germanium. So what should be the role of the United States, Australia, and other partners in making sure that we have access to these minerals? In a way, I'm asking about the geopolitics of the green transition. How should we navigate that?
It's a great question, Mireya. Let me just say, first of all, to echo what Eli said a moment ago, we're meeting our partners where they live, and we're responding to what their key challenges are. So when it's the partners in the Pacific, they're most focused on issues like climate change, right? And of course, clean energy transition is important to that. But for them, so is climate mitigation and adaptation. But I think for me, Mireya, the key point that you're raising here is the importance of secure and resilient supply chains. And I would argue not just in the clean energy, renewable energy space, but I would say across the board. And it's a real focus for us. And I think we've learned in the course of the pandemic, and we've learned watching China's use of economic coercion against a range of partners and friends over the last few years, the importance of making sure that none of us are completely dependent on one country or one supply chain, no matter the sector. So again, we talk about we're not pursuing decoupling, we're pursuing de-risking. We think this is a responsible strategy. It helps to curb against the possibility of economic coercion, but it also guards against just naturally occurring disruptions as well. There are multiple elements to that. We're working on something called the Mineral Security Partnership with a range of allies and partners to ensure, again, a diversity of supply chains in the clean energy sector. But we're also working to develop our tools to help partners respond nimbly and effectively to instances of economic coercion as well. And if I can make maybe one final point, just to foot stomp, the China point. When we talk with our allies and partners, we make very clear we're not asking them to choose. They don't want that. We want to ensure that they have choices and the ability to make their own decisions free from coercion. That's the focus of our strategy, and I think that really applies to supply chain resilience in the clean energy sector, but I would say it applies across the board, really, regarding all of our engagement in the region.
Thank you.
If we have time, I might come back to this. I'm particularly interested in deep sea mining, of which there's a huge sort of fight going on. We're not present in the International Seabed Authority, although we're observers, et cetera. And Pacific Islands are sort of caught in the middle of this, but maybe let's come back to that one if we have time. I want to go back to this question of sort of high-end security cooperation and where we are and sort of what's happening there. I'm among those that thought that AUKUS was a strategic masterstroke. I mean, really a brilliant move. The more I look at the pace at which we're doing it and the pace at which the Chinese are building, I wish we were doing twice as much, twice as fast. That would be hard. But what I want to ask you about is Pillar 2 of AUKUS, the kind of pillar on scientific cooperation, other technologies, missiles, undersea sensing, et cetera. Where are we on that? We've seen a lot of attention to Pillar 1, the submarines. Where are we on Pillar 2, and is there a prospect for other countries in the region to sort of join in, sort of use AUKUS Pillar 2 as a docking station for some of the wider collaboration you were referring to earlier?
Yep, no, absolutely. And just for folks who are maybe a little less familiar with Pillar 1 versus Pillar 2, Pillar 1 was the central focus of the beginning of the AUKUS period of developing a conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine. You don't want to get those two things backwards or you get yourself in big trouble. So a conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine for the Australians that we would be working on trilaterally with the UK as well. We completed a decision around the optimal pathway at the end of the 18-month consultation period, and that work is very much underway. At the same time, the three countries at the birth of AUKUS, and I had the opportunity to participate in some of these discussions shortly after being confirmed, was looking out at the strategic environment and said, hey, look, we're going to be working on this submarine project together, though that's going to deliver, at least as it relates to submarines, years into the future, and we ought to be working on other advanced capabilities, both in parallel to that and in advance in some of the delivery of that. So that was the theory of the case. Since that time, we have identified a series of capabilities and technology areas where these three countries are particularly suited to work together in a trilateral fashion, and then have had to work through also a number of issues associated with technology sharing and export controls, and really the hard work behind the scenes that makes this kind of an initiative possible. It's what Secretary Austin describes as hard government work. It is very labor intensive, it's very important. It involves, there's a huge role for Congress here, and we've been engaging with the Hill quite regularly. Every time I'm up in the Hill, I see the crew of Navy and Joint Staff and our capabilities folks shuffling in behind us to in the skiff to do meetings with members of Congress on AUKUS. So there's been a huge amount of engagement on the Hill, and I think we're making good progress, and we will be looking at areas associated, and those have been articulated in public statements of hypersonics and counter-hypersonics and autonomy and quantum computing and AI and in some other areas that will be really important. So I think there's increasing focus on delivering on this, and we'll be looking forward to doing that. On the question of additional partners, that is something that we will be looking at in the years ahead. It'll be obviously on a case-by-case, technology-by-technology basis, but the standard will be the same of what's in the interest of the parties here, what technologies they have to bring to bear, and in particular, what operational problems are we trying to solve.
Thanks. So if I can, building on this conversation, I think it's very clear from all the remarks so far that there is a very robust track record for this administration, thanks to all your hard effort when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to security cooperation. And clearly there's a new energy and a new presence of the United States and the development of all these new partnerships. But if I can be very candid with all of you, I think that there's still persistent questions about the economic piece, the regional connectivity piece. And in particular, the fact that the United States opted to launch the Indo-Pacific economic framework, but does not have market access. Now, of course, we were talking about de-risking from China, and certainly economic engagement and making those economies trade more with us and have these cross-border investments and so forth. It's probably a very good part of that de-risking strategy. So can you tell us about what is your assessment of where IPEF negotiations are? There is expectation that perhaps in a few months in the West Coast, in San Francisco, when APEC leaders meet, that there could be already something near conclusion when it comes to IPEF. So what would be the way in which IPEF builds that supply chain resilience, allows us to develop economic standards, and makes us more of an effective player in the economic realm in the region?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mireya. You're absolutely right. We talk about how our future security and prosperity are inextricably tied to the Indo-Pacific. So let's talk about the prosperity piece. The first point that I would make is that however you assess our formal engagement with the region on trade and other matters, we can't ignore the fact that we have $2 trillion in trade every year between the United States and the Indo-Pacific, and more than $1 trillion invested across this vitally important region, and almost $1 trillion coming from the Indo-Pacific that's invested in the United States as well. So the United States is a central player, if not the central player, excuse me, for most of these partners in the region to begin with. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact when people somehow question the commitment and the presence of the United States. But picking up on your question on what are we doing in terms of our formal engagement on trade and economic matters, I would start with Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. 14 of our closest, most like-minded partners are engaged in a really exciting endeavor that I think will help write the rules of the road for the 21st century economy. There are 4 key pillars across IPEF. There's a trade pillar, a supply chains pillar, a clean energy pillar, and then what I would call sort of good governance and counter-corruption pillar. We're making great progress on all of those. I think you've seen we've already reached substantial agreement on the supply chain pillar. I'm very confident that we're likely, I want to be careful here, we're likely to close out, I would predict perhaps 3 out of 4 by this fall. But I really do want to underscore, excuse me, just how important this agreement is. This gets at, I think, the most exciting and important aspects of the 21st century trade economy. And it helps, again, with our like-minded partners, help establish those principles and those rules of the road. I think that's vitally important going forward. There'll be aspects of this when it's done that will truly be novel and unprecedented. So whether you want to look at the reality of our ongoing trade and investment flows or the formality of our trade negotiations in IPEF, you come to the conclusion we're absolutely committed and invested in the future of the Indo-Pacific. I also don't want to forget APEC, and I hope you don't either. The United States is hosting APEC this year. We'll conclude with the APEC Economic Leaders Summit in San Francisco in November. Again, 21 of the region's key and largest economies will be there. And again, APEC is also still central to what we're doing as well. So together with our engagement through APEC and IPEF, I'm really confident in our ability to shape the economic future of the Indo-Pacific together with our partners. I'm also confident that those trade and investment flows that I've highlighted are only going to continue to grow.
Can I just maybe,
Please.
not to build on the economic point, but just to respond to the prompt, which was started with a compliment to Dan and I of the great work of our departments in deepening our alliances and partnerships. While I'm happy to take credit for all that, what I will say is from the perspective of the Pentagon and what we have seen and why we have been able to make so much progress is because of the demand signal coming from our allies and partners, that they are looking out on the regional security environment. They're focused on trying to contribute to this shared vision that we're talking about, and they're doing a few things. Number one, they across, in almost any instance, are looking to strengthen their own capabilities, and they want to work with us, and we want to support them in doing that. They are working more with each other, which is really important. You look at the relationship between Japan and Korea, Japan, as you know, throughout the region in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, the Australians working with the Philippines and the Japanese and others. They're working with each other. That's terrific. And they're looking to strengthen their relationship with the United States, which is fundamentally important. When they look out on what they're seeing in the regional security environment, they are seeking to deepen their defense and security ties with the United States. And I think that as it relates to the question of the China challenge and the U.S.-China competition, I think the point sometimes gets lost that when we are talking about our alliances and partnerships, what we were talking about, again, is meeting our partners where they are. And on the defense and security stuff, the reason we are doing what we are doing with Australia and the Philippines and Japan and South Korea and India, and you go down the list, is because those countries are coming to us as much as we're coming to them.
That's such a brilliant point. Eli, if I can say, in your introduction, or Suzanne, in your introduction to me, I was embarrassed that you revealed just how old I am, but I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I've never seen such a strong demand signal from the region for American leadership and engagement. Obviously, it's in our interest to do so, but I think our partners really are eager to engage with us and work together. And to pick up on another point Eli made earlier, I think about the incredible alignment and convergence in our views and our outlook on the region. Most of our partners in the region have formally issued Indo-Pacific strategies that are very similar to ours. This is really just a tremendous moment, and it makes me very optimistic for our future together.
Let me ask you about a couple of places which maybe are a little more challenging.
Yeah, fair enough.
Solomon
We can't be
Islands,
all optimistic
Fiji,
here, right?
Kiribati,
Yeah.
expanding Chinese presence, expanding Chinese physical presence, et cetera. How do you think about responding to that? What mix of deterrence questions, global questions, diplomatic questions, economic questions come into the mix in responding to, I think China's being reasonably successful in building out along the sort of southern reaches of Oceania, maybe less so in the northern reaches, but places like Solomon, Kiribati.
You want me to take an initial stab
Yeah,
at
I think
that?
consistent with our agreement for Dan to
Yeah.
take all the hard questions. And because, and I will say, the vast majority of our work in the Pacific Islands is not defense focused, so it really is an economic and diplomatic
why don't
effort.
I start?
Yeah,
and
go
happy
ahead.
to hear
Yeah.
your perspective as well. I guess what I would say, Bruce, again, whether it's with the Solomon Islands or Fiji or Kiribati or Tonga or any of these partners, Samoa and the like, our message is the same. Again, we come to the region in partnership. We respect the sovereignty of all of our partners. They will make their own sovereign decisions how they want to proceed, with whom they want to partner. What we've tried to make clear is what we offer to the region. We try to underscore our shared objectives and our shared interests in maintaining a free and open and secure and prosperous region. And we also try to share our concerns and our experience that decisions that some of our partners make may have implications for their own sovereignty and security down the line. So we engage with all of these partners, and to try to demonstrate the strength of our commitment and to step up our engagement, we opened in January of this year our new embassy in Honiara, the Solomon Islands, just to make sure that we're present there every day, working together with our partners in the Solomons, again, about what we can bring to the table. It's why we opened in May our new embassy in Tonga, and that's why the Secretary, when he's in Nuku'alofa, he'll formally dedicate the embassy. It's why we're talking with our partners in Kiribati about our interest in opening an American embassy there, and I'm confident that we'll continue to make progress on that, and just like we're discussing the same with our partners in Vanuatu. So again, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. We're not asking partners to choose. We're making sure they have choices and the ability to make their own decisions free from coercion, and that animates, I think, everything that we do. And I will just say, too, feel very optimistic and confident about our position and our partnerships in the Pacific Islands as well. Maybe one final point before I kick it over to Eli. When we engage in the Pacific, much of this is done through the Pacific Islands Forum as well. We do believe in the multilateral architecture in the region, just as we're committed to ASEAN centrality and engaging a lot of our partners in Southeast Asia through ASEAN. We do the same in the Pacific through the PIF, the Pacific Islands Forum. And I think it's another important feature. The PIF is quite significant. It's also why we announced our first ever U.S. envoy to the PIF, Ambassador Frankie Reed. So I think it's another important element and an advantage that we bring to the region is our focus on the multilateral piece as well. Eli?
Yeah, I was just going to underscore the degree to which we are working closely with our allies and partners on these issues, insofar as some of the places you mentioned are just as important, obviously, to Australia and New Zealand, France, who's also a Pacific power, Japan, Korea, and others, as we think about that free and open Indo-Pacific. So I think the more we are working with that collective group of countries, the more success we're going to have, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. And you mentioned this, Secretary of Defense is going to Papua New Guinea, key partner, of course. The Secretary was just out there a few weeks ago, where he met with the leaders. We've signed the new defense cooperation agreement that Eli mentioned earlier. Again, I think if you go down the list of every partner in the Pacific, you'll see exciting new developments for each and every one of them. So I guess the conclusion is I feel pretty optimistic about our position in the Pacific as well.
If I may, staying with this very important element we've been discussing of the demand signal for U.S. leadership, for U.S. presence, for U.S. contributions. And obviously there are many factors that go into that, why our partners are so eager to see us stay anchored to the region. And some of them have to do with hard deterrence questions. Sure. Others have to do about economic resilience. So let me stay with that last part. And many of our partners, Australia certainly, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they have suffered economic coercion, economic retaliatory measures.
Absolutely.
And I think that there is a very vocal discussion these days as to what should we do about this. In the last G7 summit, a new platform mechanism was created. And Australia, of course, attended the G7, so I'm sure that they also had views on this. And I think that there's progress being made. But the more I think about how you curb economic coercion, the more difficult this problem seems to me, because the collective action problem is steep. And there are questions as to whether it's wise to retaliate, how you effectively deter, how do you help weaker partners. So if you could bring us up to date on how do you think the U.S. can make an effective contribution on this topic of economic coercion in a way in which, again, it makes it very clear that the U.S. has much to offer to the region to make sure that economic stability remains central to its future.
It's a great question, Mireya. Thanks for posing it. I guess I'd approach it in a couple of different ways. The first, I think, is continuing to engage in trying to build the resilience of our partners and their supply chains over the long term. I think that's the best, most sustainable way to reduce the risk of economic coercion, right? To make sure whether, again, it's in the critical minerals space, the clean energy space, or across other supply chains, to make sure that countries are thinking carefully about their own resilience and autonomy as they make investments in the future. And so I think that supply chain resilience and stability work, security work, will be probably the most important part of it going forward. And I do want to underscore in that regard, we're not doing this alone. In the Pacific Islands, I would highlight the work we're doing with what we call the partners in the Blue Pacific. We launched this last year with a number of like-minded partners. I don't know if I can name them all: Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the UK, Korea, Germany. Who else? Canada. Thank you, Melissa. So like-minded partners who share a vision for stable and secure and prosperous Pacific Islands. And again, just to underscore, meeting our partners where they are. All of the priorities that we work on in the Partners in the Blue Pacific come from the Pacific Island Forum's 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. It's identifying what their needs are, including in the economic security space, and then delivering, I think, real results to them. And then the second piece that I would highlight, Mireya, is some of the work that we've done in the short term, on an urgent basis. If a partner is, in fact, subjected to crippling economic coercion, what can we do with these like-minded partners? One example that I would highlight would be our Lithuanian friends. When China went after them for some of the steps that they took, we worked very resolutely, both bilaterally and with other partners, to make sure we could offer a range of economic and financing and investment tools to make sure that they could sustain that initial onslaught of economic coercion measures. And I think we learned some important lessons there. And we've developed new tools that I think could be applied in the short term if there are other partners who suffer the same fate. But I think the long-term work is probably the most important. You want to add anything to that?
No, I thought that was terrific.
Okay.
Suzanne mentioned I was the Director of Studies at CNAS, and we did an enormous amount of work at the time on this question of economic coercion, and I'm going to avoid danger and not talk about that and stick to my lane here, but it's an important issue, and I think Dan hit the highlights.
I know soon we'll turn to the audience. We've got a lot of people online and some, an awful lot of knowledgeable people in the room. But we've talked primarily about the Pacific, and it is an Indo-Pacific. So I just want to briefly bring in the Indo, and particularly the Indians. And even as you're on your way to Australia, PNG, Tonga, New Zealand, et cetera, building up the partnership, collaboration, engagement, defense, all sorts of other topics with the Indians has been a priority, not just this administration, several administrations in a row. But I just want to sort of get you both to comment a little bit on how you see India fitting into this wider partnership and wider framework of what we're trying to get done, whether that's through the Quad or other things.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that first. This has been, again, not to overuse the word historic, but this has been a huge year in the U.S.-India relationship. There were a number of meetings, starting with the ISET meeting between our national security advisors, which launched a new technology cooperation agreement mechanism that has defense elements. There were a series of interactions in the first part of the year. Secretary Austin went out to Delhi after Shangri-La. And then, of course, Prime Minister Modi came here, and the President hopefully will be going out to India for the G20 later this year. So just a series of really important engagements, and therein have been unprecedented if you ask people 5-10 years ago, unthinkable forms of cooperation, and we are doing that in the defense lane, both in the defense industrial space. We had a huge announcement on some cooperation we're going to be doing on jet engines, as well as in the operational space with a particular focus on the Indian Ocean region, as well as in new domains, undersea, cyber, and space. So really exciting collaboration, and that is on every level good for the United States. And so we see this as deeply in our national interest, but also very important to that free and open Indo-Pacific that we talk about. So, and I know our good friend, coordinator Kurt Campbell, has described this relationship as the most consequential bilateral relationship in this century, and this administration is getting after it with that intent.
Here, here. Can't add much to that. I would just say the development of the Quad, I think, is one of the most significant strategic developments I've seen in the course of my career. I think it's really transformational for all the reasons that Eli has outlined, because bringing in India, again, another like-minded democracy to work on these issues is really, really transformational, game changer.
So my last question before we open it to the public, and we have questions online, but also from the audience. I think that we're really witnessing a profound transformation in the region. It has already come up in our conversation because it's becoming a region of networks. And some of these are broad security economic cooperation, some of them are issue specific. So it's hard to pick which one I would like to ask you about, but and certainly I'm looking forward to the announcements on the Australia, Japan, US piece and how that's going to work out. But one that I am very interested in, and that is a trilateral partnership between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. Because a few years ago, that would seem unthinkable. And when you read that statement in November in Phnom Penh about trilateral Pacific partnership, that there is this commonality in terms of reading what the challenges for the region are, I thought that was really striking. So I would like to ask, how do you see what is the potential of this trilateral partnership? But also bringing Australia back into the conversation, because in the back of our mind, and I'm sure the audience will ask about this, we haven't yet mentioned Taiwan. But when we think about a Taiwan contingency, are allies closely aligned when it comes to think about deterrence and potential scenarios? How advanced are contingency plans? Where are we in this space?
Great question, very broad question. That's a good one to end on, I think. Maybe I'll take the first part and then try to address your final point on Taiwan. The word that we like in the State Department rather than network is lattice work. We talk about these overlapping networks that are both formal and informal that I think together, form this web of partnerships that help us secure peace and prosperity across the region. It starts with our bilateral treaty alliances and our many partnerships across the region, but then it extends to the unprecedented level of trilateral cooperation that we've achieved with Tokyo and Seoul. I think based mostly on the historic rapprochement that has taken place between the two of them, and we really do commend President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida for the historic progress they've made, and that's really unlocked the unprecedented trilateral cooperation that you see now. But you see it in our work with Australia, and then including trilaterally with Japan. You see it in the new trilateral cooperation that we're building out between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. You see it in our commitment to the Pacific Islands Forum and all of our partners across the Pacific, our new elevated comprehensive strategic partnership with ASEAN. I can go on and on, but we really are about building these networks or this lattice work of interlocking relationships. I think that will be the key to preserving peace and security across the region. Look, you are right. We talked about the region, and I don't think we actually specifically said the word Taiwan until now, which is extraordinary, but let's talk about it now. The point that we're trying to make is that the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait has to be a matter of international concern. The maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is central to global security and prosperity. 50% of the world's container traffic flows through the Taiwan Strait. 90% of the world's high-end chips are made in Taiwan. Taiwan is central to the global economy. So again, maintaining peace and stability, preventing a crisis or conflict across the Taiwan Strait should be a matter of concern for all of our partners in the region and around the world. And I think what I've been gratified by is that I think many partners recognize that. There's an increasing awareness of that importance, and we hope that together all of us can contribute to maintaining that peace and stability. Now, I do, for the record, want to underscore there's been absolutely no change to our one China policy. I can walk you through chapter and verse, but again, we are committed to maintaining the status quo and peace and stability. And our message to our counterparts in Beijing is to not challenge that status quo, to cease, we think, the provocative and coercive actions that they've taken across the strait and aimed at Taiwan, so that we can all, again, continue to focus on peace and stability.
The only thing I would add to that, which was just terrific, just on the prompt of the groupings that you're talking about, I think this is, again, I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but arguably the most important innovation and new trend in the regional security environment, insofar as these types of groupings are starting to actually do things together. This isn't just about getting together and having dialogue and sharing views. That's very important in and of itself. But if you look at the US, Japan, Korea defense trilateral, we are now talking about sharing early missile warning data, which our leaders have talked about. We are developing plans for more regularized exercises rather than just exercises in response to DPRK activity. So huge, important innovations to institutionalize and really cement that kind of cooperation. Similarly, the US, Japan, Australia configuration is the leading edge from a defense and security perspective. Just absolutely important and unprecedented cooperation there, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. Dan mentioned the Philippines out at Shangri-La. In June, for the first time ever, US Secretary of Defense got together with his Japanese, Australian, and Philippine counterparts for a discussion there. Fundamentally shared interests, particularly in the maritime domain and in the South China Sea. And then Dan mentioned the Quad, ASEAN, et cetera, where we are engaging in new forms of defense and security cooperation, particularly as it relates to maritime domain awareness. So a huge amount of activity here in a way that I think we've been building to this point. And I think that's the future, is going to be these countries capable, working together, mobile, and cooperating in new and exciting ways.
Great. So you've been very generous. Now let's open it up to the public. There are a lot of questions. I'm going to take two at a time. I will ask you to please identify yourself and keep it to a question, not a comment, and be very concise. There's a lot of people and everybody wants to ask their questions. So I'll start with the lady in the back and then this gentleman in the middle. Yes.
Hi, my name is Laurel Schwartz. I'm a writer for the China Project, and I recently returned from working in Beijing as a Canadian Chinese principal at a school there. And at CIS a couple weeks ago, Secretary Kritenbrink, you mentioned that the Fulbright China program was not discussed on the trip last month to Beijing. What is the timeline for restoring that program, particularly as you mentioned that China is part of the discussion as you are going to the region, and that it could also be restored by an executive order? Thank you.
Thank you. And then this gentleman, Laura, yes, in the middle.
Thank you very much. Reporter with China Review News Agency. My name is Dong Huiyu. And my question is for Mr. Eli. Last week, you met with Chinese Ambassador Xie Feng in Washington. I believe you are talking about the resumption of the male-to-male relations. Did you talk about how to remove the obstacle that China claim that need to be removed to resume the male-male relations? Did you talk about removing the sanctions on Chinese defense minister? Thank you.
So on the first question on people-to-people ties, I'll just reiterate what I said in front of our friends at CSS a few weeks ago. Look, our relationship with the People's Republic of China is exceptionally consequential and equally complex. But there's no doubt, as Secretary Blinken stated publicly and privately in Beijing, that we do have an interest in continuing to develop people-to-people ties between the United States and China. I don't have anything to say. I don't know what may or may not happen on Fulbright, but there are a number of other opportunities to promote people-to-people exchange. And also, as you saw, one of the agreements that we had coming out of the visit was that we want to look at trying to increase the number of commercial flights between the two countries, which would help promote that. So an important issue, but don't have any specific update on Fulbright.
And I'll say, just as it relates to my meeting last week with the ambassador, we had a very good discussion. I'm not going to characterize those discussions, but I will say what Secretary Austin has emphasized on a number of occasions, which is that the United States continues to seek open lines of communication with the PLA. We think this is important for stability in peacetime and during potential crises, and it's unfortunate that the PLA has not responded to that outstretched hand, and we are going to continue to encourage open lines of communication without precondition.
Thank you. So we're going to take more questions, but I want to put a question from the online audience so they don't think that we have forgotten about them. And then I'll take one from the floor. And this is a question about our allies in Southeast Asia. And they ask, what is the role or the place of the Philippines? It's a question from Kathy Truex, and of Thailand from Anthony Zola in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. What is the state of the alliance with these two countries, and what place do they have in the overall Indo-Pacific strategy?
You want us to take that one?
And then,
okay.
and then I forgot.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. I'll take. I think you were.
Thank you, Patrick Tucker from Defense One. So in the run-up to the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, one of the things that military officials have acknowledged was an intelligence failure in underestimating the willingness of the Ukrainian people to mount protracted armed resistance. And multiple senior military leaders that I've spoke to, as well as lawmakers, have expressed concern and uncertainty that we might be making a reverse mistake right now with China and Taiwan, and possibly overestimating the ability or the willingness of the Taiwanese people to mount protracted armed resistance. Is there any study or analysis to suggest that whether they would or they wouldn't, and what role allies in the region might be willing to play outside of a formal military alliance?
And
Thanks.
can you identify yourself?
Patrick Tucker from Defense One. Thanks.
So on the first question on Philippines and Thailand, and I presume Eli might want to chime in as well. Again, when we look at our strategy, we start by making sure that we strengthen and revitalize our treaty alliance relationships. And certainly we've done that, I think, with both the Philippines and Thailand. I think the progress we made with the Philippines over the last year is really breathtaking, actually. And you think about the 2+2 that we did earlier this year with our Filipino allies. You think about the tremendous work we're doing in the security domain, the maritime domain, but also in our economic and trade and people-to-people ties. Really breathtaking. And so I would argue that our alliance with the Philippines is probably stronger than ever. And look, I think we've made significant progress with our Thai allies as well. I know that when Secretary Blinken visited there last year, we issued a joint vision statement that I've told people I think is the most significant bilateral strategic document issued between the United States and Thailand since the 1962 Tanat Rusk communique. It really is that significant. Obviously, there are some challenges as well. We're all watching closely what's happening in the transition following the election, and we're looking to our Thai friends to make sure that outcome reflects the will of the Thai people, and that's certainly our expectation. We're also working closely on a range of challenges across the region, probably first and foremost the situation across the border in Myanmar. But there too, I think we've made important progress with our Thai allies, very optimistic about our future together. Do you want to say anything more on that?
Maybe agree with all of that. And on the Philippines, I think the revitalization of the U.S.-Philippines alliance will be a legacy issue for the Biden administration and for Secretary Austin, who has poured a huge amount of energy into that relationship. We've managed to travel out there a couple times. He met both with former President Duterte, and that was really the beginning of a renewal of the relationship, and that has just accelerated through the Marcos administration as well, and we've made incredible headway, again, on the force posture front as it relates to capabilities development and some of our operational cooperation. So I think that's a hugely important development in the region, and one we have put a lot of energy to and really greatly value. On the question of Taiwan, my answer to that question would be what I see is the Taiwanese making an important commitment to their own defense and resilience. They made a political commitment in terms of the types of reforms, military reform, reserve reforms that they have enacted. They've made a substantial financial commitment as it relates to major increases to their defense budget. So I look at what they do and how they're responding to the type of coercion they're under as a significant and reassuring sign of their commitment to their own resilience and defense.
So we're almost at time. I haven't taken questions from this side of the room, so I'll go one and then two. And please, yes, please be very, very brief so that we can have some answers. And then it'll be, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hi. My name is Christian Gouchard. I'm a second-year Master's Public Policy student at UCLA and DC native. My question was to both of you. I just said, I feel like much of the United States issues establishing, soft power or, just strategic partnerships in some of these regions has to do with the recent history of Western intervention in those regions. Whether those were failures or successes, the memory of the misuse or failed approaches, still stands in those regions. How, in your opinion, can the United States establish itself, as in the words of Louis Foyer or Patrick Moynihan, the nation of conscience in this 21st century, and what needs to be done to restore the cross-cultural ties and trust between the United States and other countries, and specifically between the U.S. and Indo-Pacific.
Great, thank you very much. And then the last question, and brevity is appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post, and I just wanted to ask your sense of, there was that Chinese effort to kind of wrap together a lot of the Pacific Island nations in a security cooperation plan, pact. That didn't work out so well, but I was wondering if you could tell us your sense of the current Chinese strategy in terms of sort of breaking it down, country by country. Not asking you to go country by country, but if that collective effort didn't work out, what's your sense of the new way they're going about doing things? You've mentioned coercion a couple of times, so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your assessment of the Chinese activity right now.
Great. So
Thanks.
Two very important broad questions, 1 minute each, maybe.
1 minute each. Well, maybe on the first one. Look, I think what animates the work, certainly that we do in the State Department every day, how do we demonstrate the credibility of America's commitment to the region? How do we demonstrate, right, that we bring tangible benefits for both peoples of the region and the American people? That animates what we do. We've been an Indo-Pacific power for well over a century. We're invested for the long term, and I think we do amazing things together, rooted mostly in the shared vision we have for our future together. When I listened to your question, I thought back briefly to my time in Hanoi, where I was the ambassador to Vietnam for 3.5 years. And it reminded me there, too, that even with countries with whom we share a very painful and sometimes tragic past, there, too, we've made really dramatic and historic strides to overcome that past. And in the case of Vietnam, for example, we built this amazing partnership and friendship now where we're doing extraordinary things together, even as we continue to work on those legacy of war projects. And it's probably the best example that I can think of. One comment on the Pacific. I mean, my job's not really to describe China's strategy. It's obviously to talk about what we offer. But I think there's no doubt that counterparts in Beijing are trying to extend Chinese influence across the region and across the world. We leave it to our partners to make their own sovereign decisions, but we try to help them understand what some of the consequences can be if you were to enter into an agreement that might have implications for your sovereignty down the line. But again, the main animating feature of what we do every day is to underscore what do we offer and what do we bring to the table. What would you add to that, Eli?
I'll just say in conclusion, we've spoken a lot about the shared vision we have with the region for a free and open Indo-Pacific. The PRC is putting forward an alternative vision, and they're doing that through their actions every day in their unsafe operational behavior, risky and dangerous operational behavior against maritime and aircraft that are operating in accordance with international law. We see that the PRC putting forward an order defined by the kind of economic coercion that Mireya talked about, and we see them engaging in other forms of corruption and influence throughout the region, and countries throughout the region have a choice about which type of order they want to live in, and I think through their actions you can see how they're coming together over the last several months and years.
Thank you very much. So we're at time, only 1 minute passed. And before I wrap up, I want to ask you all to please remain seated. And we're going to let our speakers, they need to get on with their day, so they're going to depart the building. So I'll ask you to remain seated. On behalf of Suzanne, Bruce, and me, I want to thank you profoundly for this opportunity. I think that we begin to see, or we're confirmed as to why the region has a strong demand signal. It's not only all the hard work you do on diplomacy and economic engagement and all the issues we covered, but your willingness to come here and engage with all of us and answer all these questions in such a forthright manner. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking them for their appearance.
Thank you. That was great.